China. I'm quoting you again. China has gone from bad to worse, from a communist regime to a worse communist regime, in that there are simply no individuals allowed. Anybody who deviates from the party line gets crushed, close quote. Well, yes, but at the same time, so goes the argument, the Chinese have lifted 600 or 700 million people out of poverty, that the system of freedom and individual liberties that you and I cherish, it's the past. The Chinese have invented a new model of tight central control combined with free markets, and that's the future. Ray Dalio of Bridgewater, one of the richest men in America, he's invested heavily in China. When asked about Chinese human rights violations, I'm paraphrasing him, I don't want to be unfair to him, but he said, in effect, it's like a family in China, and they're strict parents. We're too permissive, they're strict parents. So he spoke with real admiration, not just of investment opportunities, but of the system that's making them possible. To which you reply, how?
Well, Peter, it seems to me you're making the historicist argument on China that it's just these inevitable forces of history that drive everything. And something like this might have been true of the China from '89 to 2013, where they looked at the Soviet Union, and I think the Chinese ideology was, we're not going to be the Soviet Union. We're going to have perestroika without glasnost. And it was
we the party will retain control. Will retain control
with some elements of a free market, some elements of an more efficient economy, but we'll continue to have Leninist political control, even if we don't have Marxist economics. But I think the way I would frame China since 2013 is that it's very different. It is Putin is a positive role model for Xi, rather than the Soviet Union being a negative role model for China. And it's, not sure Putin's been great for Russia, but he gets to be president until 2036. It's working for him individually. And so I think China works for exactly one individual, Mr. Xi. And then it doesn't work for anybody else anymore. And certainly there's a large class of successful individuals who've gotten clobbered this last year. The Jack Ma story is the most remarkable one. And
Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, who criticized the Chinese regulatory regime, as I understand the story, and then simply disappeared. Now he's appeared. He's still alive. He's appeared on a trip recently, the last couple of weeks. But let's put it this way: he's fallen silent.
Yes, and there's been a way that the tech companies have generally gotten clobbered, and it is just there are no individuals allowed. There are maybe no wealthy people allowed. We are, it is back to a far more totalitarian playbook, and so whatever worked about the Chinese development path in the 70s, 80s, 90s, I feel is very different. There's probably some development where you can copy the advanced countries, and maybe copying is something you can do in a not very free society. But then once you get to the frontier and you have to do new things, that's a very, very tricky question.
Peter,
it seems to me that China is sort of like a much worse version of Japan. Like Japan wasn't the freest country. It was a culturally weird place. It was not a totalitarian communist country. But for many decades, it had a great model of copying and catching up. And then by the 80s, it sort of had caught up, and then it hit the wall. And China just seems like a much more deranged, dysfunctional version of Japan.
Remind me of the year you published 0 to 1, your book 0 to 1.
2014.
All right, 2014. So in 2014, in 0 to 1, on the first or second page, as I recall, you argue that when it comes to it, really China does not know, in 2014, as of 2014, China did not know how to do 0 to 1. It did not know how to do what we do in Silicon Valley, which is really innovate, start with nothing and come up with something that didn't exist before. Is that still the case? Or are you worried about, again, this is not my world, but I hear people concerned about the Chinese catching up and overtaking us in AI, for example. Have they achieved the capacity to go from 0 to 1 now under this regime?
You have to look at a whole series of different technological verticals. So it's a question about 5G with Huawei. You have to look at the hypersonic missiles. There's a whole bunch of crazy stuff in space. So there's sort of there are a series of different verticals, and then there's of course the AI one. My sense is that for the most part they have not overtaken us. There is a geopolitical problem for the U.S. if they just catch up to us. China, if you get to the same per capita GDP, the same technological level of the U.S., so they copy everything, they don't invent anything, but you have a country with 4 times the people, 4 times the GDP, 4 times the military, it will become, the dominant superpower. So I think there's a certain sense in which it was not clear that China really needed to innovate, and maybe it just needed to copy in order to sort of get to some kind of world domination. But all that being said, that's from my view circa 2014. If I fast forward to 2021, it feels like it's really gone haywire. Where it is, you always had the Leninist structures. They've tightened those up, and we're actually going back to some kind of Marxist economy, and it is very strange how it's become. The extreme version a historian told me the other day was that he thought Xi was the best thing happening to the West because he was sabotaging China in every way possible.
They're getting in their own way again.
He was just turning it into North Korea, which again is too extreme. But there is sort of a question. What is the internal logic of totalitarianism that breaks it? What stops it from killing more people and going ever crazier? There were ways it de-escalated after the Cultural Revolution, after Stalin, but there also can be a totalitarian logic of intensification, escalation, and it seems to be in that right now, and it's not obvious where that stops. And people have, Xi's been in power for 8 years, since 2013, and every year people have said, it's about to, there's an anti-corruption campaign that was just cleaning things up.
He's reasserted control.
And then it's going to go back to normal. And then every year it has actually intensified.